Okay, people. I'm back with my Ireland book. I'm not sure exactly what part I left off with, but I'm gonna read for a little while and I can't get this one. It's kind of loud. I don't know why. I'm having volume issues with this darn thing. So, this is right on a hillside. I'll start with that one. Now, there lived on a hillside a certain lady. She was tall, she had thin brown hair, known as the Angry Woman. Her husband was dead, killed by a mad elk, spiked on its horns one morning when he was blinded by the sun and unable to measure how close the animal had come. Some said that the goring of her man made this woman angry. Others claimed she'd always been angry, except with her own child, a red-haired girl, 8 years old, whom she loved like a tigress loves her cub. Since the end of the morning, this angry woman had desired a new husband, and the mate she wanted was our young man, the architect. So, she's gonna do what she can to, pretty much meet up with this guy, and I believe she, actually works with the architect. So she watched the architect for some time, studied his mixture of tenderness and anger, saw the efficient way he dealt with things round and about the hillside, and observed all his impatience with fools. Shrewd women always value intelligence in a man. And here was a fellow who had the brains and handsome looks, and now he had power. She didn't care he was moody. She was moody herself. Once or twice she approached him, knowing she risked his snub. But at a feast she filled his plate, and he never even looked at her. When he left the meeting that day, the architect went alone down the hill. He had a walk like the lope of a wolf. Behind him the crowd lingered, chattering like sparrows on a roof. At the doorway of the longhouse, the angry woman stood for a moment, and saw the man of her desires striding toward the river. Her heart still raced at the excitement she'd just witnessed. She wanted to talk to him in his moment of triumph, but she didn't wish him to know how she felt. Once again she faced the difficulty of this man. When she met him or spoke to him, he improved the way she felt. He enlarged her life. He made the day bright and bearable. But he gave her no direct or tangible evidence that she had any effect of any kind on him. Okay, this is interesting. I kind of know somebody like that. After a moment's thought, she followed him. To disguise her intention, she took a different route. Where he'd gone to the south, she headed west, to the reed beds, and began plucking rushes to cover the earthy floor of their home. She hoped that he would see her, and soon he did. When she lifted a sheath of the green, wide blades from the water's edge, the swing of her white arms caught his eye. The architect gestured to the angry woman and began to walk toward her. She stopped building her rush pile and waited for him, anxious. She ran her tongue along the back of her upper teeth. A young man held out his hand, and she took it. She could see he was agitated. She could see he had difficulty controlling his mood. So she stroked his bare forearm and led him into the grove along the riverbank. Inside the trees, where nobody on the hill could now see them, they lay down on the grass. And no, they're not going to do me naughty. She began to talk to him, at least right now. I don't know if they do yet. I haven't got that far. She said he had been given a great honor. Nobody would carry it off better than he could. Slowly but surely she calmed him down, and through it all, he never said a word. In a clear western sky, the sun shone. Some time passed, and the breeze ruffled the water. The couple lay on the ground, hugging each other tighter and tighter. Eventually the architect stood up and walked silently away. From the edge of the grove he turned to look at the angry woman, who sat up. He walked back to her, bent down, and stroked her hair kindly. Then he helped her to her feet, and they went their separate ways.
That's about 250 years
From
old.
the folds of his deerskin tunic, the architect took a small pointed stone. With this, he began to etch patterns in the soft black mud. Nothing he drew satisfied him, and he leaned back on his haunches. Getting restless, he rose, walked further along the riverbank, and began to sketch on a different patch of mud. This time he drew a picture of the hill of Newgrange. Like any painter, he looked up now and then to check the proportions. Even though it was composed of very few lines, this picture took him several minutes. When he finished it, he stood to his full height in order to look down on the drawing at his feet. His mind's eye filled with a new perspective. At that moment, the angry woman came back to the edge of the wood, her arms full of rushes, stood where he could see her. She smiled cautiously at him and walked forward to where he could see her better. Her smile turned to gold. There's an old saying, man's love is of man's life a thing apart. 'Tis a woman's whole existence. The way the angry woman smiled at the architect was important to her, but not to him. Instead, he turned away, crouched again, and in the mud drew a beautiful sketch. He drew a wide circle, then a thick single line entering the circle. By now, his entire body quaked with excitement. He made a clear drawing of a small rectangular box. The architect stood up, exhausted. He knew he had wonderful inspiration. He knew he decided what this great monument of Newgrange would be and what it would look like, the flow of it, the brilliance it can take. And it was such a simple idea. He also recognized it would be very difficult to achieve. Quite simply, the architect of Newgrange had decided to make the sun in the sky do his bidding. Genius works in many ways. In some people it comes at the end of the year spent thinking deep and earnest thoughts. With others, the brilliant idea flashes in their mind from nowhere, the way a hawk attacks the sun behind it. That afternoon, the architect brought his mind code higher and higher. Wow. This would be a good nighttime story. I should be reading this at night. He had asked himself as he drew his pictures in the mud, can I capture the sun to keep our dead warm? And then the apartment light also flows. The very night, the architect chose his first team of workers, 5 people, 4 men of Newgrange, and the angry woman. No plan did he divulge to them, no schedule of works, no path of progress. Instead, he said, you must tell nobody, ever, anything of what we do. Do you understand? He understood he might kill anyone who betrayed his confidence. Next morning, he led his workers westward, out into the deep countryside, carrying nothing but food wrapped in leaves. The 5-strong team walked silently behind him for 2 hours. At last he stopped by a grove, pointed down a steep slope to a large flat stone half hidden in the ferns. It measured 4 times the width of his body and twice his height. Bring this back to the hillside. The 4 men looked at each other. Impossible. First they must ease it from the earth, or more likely dig it out, and a stone like that could go down 10 yards deep. It might even be a mountaintop. Do they have to travel whole? No stone you bring back may be broken, so tell me how you will accomplish it. Big riddle. Big riddle. They all looked at each other and thought, no, not impossible. Not possible. All day, these 4 men had been perpetrating a nasty injustice, because they hadn't spoken a word to the angry woman. Let's see. This would be more appropriate. I don't know. The Wild Rover. So he's leaving the team to figure out what to do. But, of course, the angry woman comes up with a suggestion. She says, I know what to do. The 4 men looked at her suspiciously. The architect nodded. One man opened his mouth to say, explain, but she fooled him with a look that might kill a bull. The architect left his team, prizing loose their stone, and went back to Newgrange. Next day, he led the first pair, a 10-year-old boy and the angry woman's young daughter, into the countryside. Both children carried small bunches of pointed twigs. Some days later, he went back to find the angry woman and her co-workers. They lifted the stone and left the grove. All he saw was a wide, shallow crater of brown earth. He followed the trail they gouged in the earth with their big rock. The angry woman thought to cut down trees to use trunks as rollers across the countryside. Now, at the riverbank, she ordered the men to build a little pier of smaller rocks, and tree branches. She made them double the structure, building one raft on top of another with some overlaps to guarantee buoyancy. It'll float better. Her calculation worked. As the architect watched, they eased the stone onto the raft, and no catastrophe occurred. All 4 men stood in the water, ready to guide it. They moved as fast as the river's current. The architect kept pace with them along a ridge above the riverbank. What a pleasing sight! A great flat sand-colored rock sitting like a captured animal astride a raft of tree trunks tied with soft, springy branches, and the angry woman lying face down on the stone, using her hands as oars. So she's basically laying just prostrate over this big rock on this raft that they made. For the next 12 years, they made hundreds of these journeys, basically to build this thing. And it looks like they had to travel up to 30 miles away. They suffered frightful injuries. In the cold weather, their hands froze to the surface of the stone. They slipped on rocks, and the bindings made of thin branches ripped their flesh. Flash floods on the water left them gasping and terrified. The hazards increased. As the architect developed the site, he chose larger and larger stones. Some rocks fell on the laborers, pinning or shattering an arm or leg, or a boulder killed them, bringing instant death through a crushed skull or ribcage. Nothing, he said, must interfere with the work. A hard man when young, he grew harder with age. He reserved his tenderness for his materials. When a new rock arrived, he paid as much attention as a cat to her kitten. While he hurried at work, he seemed in himself to have become a somewhat happy man, certainly a fulfilled one. He embarked upon a great enterprise and felt himself succeeding at it. The angry woman's admiration for him grew and grew. She found him wonderful. He possessed qualities she wanted in a man. He was strong, decisive, inspired, so she stayed near him, and without ever asking, she appointed herself his closest helper. When he forgot to eat, she brought him food. When he looked exhausted, she suggested rest. And she always brought him good news from the hillside. She told herself, I shall ignore the hurt. I shall be patient. I shall content myself to wait. Then one day, when all this has been completed, he'll take me into his life. He made one gesture and encouraged her to bide her time. 6 years into the enterprise, her daughter reached the age of 14, old enough to work as messenger. The architect appointed her into his service. The girl was delighted, but not nearly as pleased as her mother. What she didn't know was the fear under which he worked. Everywhere he went, he could see the sleek face of the silken elder. They wanted to do that recompense, where if he failed, they could basically kill him. All the while, the magnificent rocks continued to writhe on the green slopes of Newgrange like a breed of strange animal. Some gleamed like flowers, others seemed darker. But if you look closely, you could see they had souls. That's what some ancient Celtics believed. The architect declared that certain stones would bear messages to their ancestors, words of gratitude, symbols of praise, whose work would take as long as the building itself. By the end of the 12th year, most of the construction work was done, but now he came to a standstill. He wanted different stones, beautiful stones, for the front of the building. Fortune rode in, as fortune will for those she favors. One day, a little round boat, like a bowl made of cowhide, bounced up the river buoyant. Inside it sat a small man with no hair, who looked up and admired the great work in progress. And I believe that is the silken elder. He has no hair. The little bald man in his bowl of a boat saw it and couldn't take his eyes off the building. He told the people of Newgrange that where he came from, he seen stones that looked as white as the moon. The angry woman rushed to tell this news to the architect. In the boat with them sat the little bald man. When they reached the moment where the river Boyne joins the sea, they sailed 5 days south. They entered the mouth of another river and followed it inland. That journey came to more than 70 miles. There was grass overgrowing everything. When they scrabbled at it, they found underneath precisely what the architect wanted, loose rocks of all sizes. They did indeed look like the moon. They looked like silver dipped in cream. pearls that the gods hidden in the grass to be stumbled upon like treasure. For the next 3 years, 100 boats took the waters of Boyne and disappeared round the bend to fetch the wonderful stones from Wicklow. One sunlit morning, the people of Newgrange looked across a distant ridge and saw a man behaving strangely. As they watched, he descended the ridge and returned to the hillside, where he also stood and framed his arms to the sun. With an array of sticks, long and short, with stones placed at intervals along the ground, he took measurements, paced out distances, eyed levels. He directed some of the children to gather a collection of small but long stones. He thought he was trying to measure the length of the sun's rays on the grass. That is indeed what he was doing. He was measuring the effect of light upon everything, his fingers against stones of various heights, amongst the shadows of the trees, upon the ridge of the hill. Sometimes he came to the workplaces or dwelling, took hold of the first person he saw, and made them stand still while he measured the shadow on the grass. Naturally, nobody asked him what he was doing, but in front of their eyes, a great idea was being born. At last came the day when everything seemed ready. All the measurements were taken, all his calculations sealed. Now the building was finished. Now the carvings had been completed, and the last stones were set in place. What a long trial it had been. The mornings of extracting one more effort from the builders, afternoons of preventing one more roll from cracking in the last throes of carving, evenings of despair that not enough stones had yet been found and shared, and the nights of fear that nothing would come of it at all. He'd known since the beginning of the project what day he'd choose. They have to set a day for the opening ceremony. He never told anyone this, lest his experiments fail him. So he chooses the December solstice, the shortest day of that year. And it had taken them like 15 years to make this building. The architect wasn't yet excited at the thought of all his planning and the experimentation bearing fruit, nor did he dwell on what the silken elder would do to his body in the recompense of everything failed. Instead, memories came pouring back, especially when he thought of the most delicate and sensitive part of the building, a box of 4 flat stones above the door. 2 of the stones were about 4 feet long or 3 feet wide, and the smaller 2 were 3 feet by 1.5. Not until almost every other aspect and detail of the building had been completed would he add the crucial detail, the most important single component. And I think from there I will end the telling. I don't want to get longer than 20 minutes. And I need to pause my music. Anyway. Sorry this ran on. I will maybe do another reading later. I think right now I can feel my stomach growling, and I'm just waking up, kind of ready to take a nap yet today. And I'm going to recolor my hair, get it kind of looking a little bit better. So, stay tuned.